St. Nicholas Day had always been a cozy, low-key tradition in our marriage. Emily and I didn't go overboard, just a small exchange of thoughtful gifts, a glass of wine, and maybe a classic Christmas movie to set the holiday mood. For the past 8 years, it had been our little way of slowing down during the chaos of December and reminding ourselves what we were grateful for. This year, though, things felt different. Emily came home late that evening, carrying a neatly wrapped silver box. Her cheeks were flushed from the cold, but there was an excitement in her eyes I hadn't seen in months. "Guess what Sarah gave me?" she said, setting the box down on the kitchen counter like it was a trophy. Sarah had been Emily's best friend for years, but lately, her name seemed to come up more and more. They met at work, bonded over their love of wine and yoga, and quickly became inseparable. I'd always thought of Sarah as harmless, even if her presence sometimes felt a little too much. She was the kind of person who always knew how to command attention, whether it was through her designer clothes, sharp wit, or expensive taste. "What's that?" I asked, turning off the stove as I watched her tear into the wrapping paper. "A St. Nicholas gift," Emily said, her grin widening as she revealed the box's contents. It was a bracelet. Not just any bracelet, a delicate gold chain adorned with small, glimmering diamonds. The kind of thing you'd see in a high-end boutique, the kind of thing I'd have to save months for if I wanted to afford it. "Wow," I said, trying to sound impressed instead of suspicious. "That's thoughtful of her. Isn't it gorgeous?" Emily said, slipping it onto her wrist and holding it up to the light. She said it reminded her of me. I felt my chest tighten. "That's a little extravagant, don't you think?" Emily waved me off with a laugh. "Oh, you know Sarah. She loves going all out. Besides, she said it's a thank you for always being there for her." "Being there for her," I repeated, my tone carefully neutral. Emily rolled her eyes playfully. "You're reading too much into it, Jake. It's just a gift." I wanted to believe her. I really did. But something about the way she looked at that bracelet, the way she beamed as she talked about Sarah, didn't sit right with me. That night, as we sat on the couch watching TV, Emily's phone buzzed with a notification. She glanced at it, smiled, and then flipped it face down on the coffee table. "You texting Sarah?" I asked, keeping my tone casual. "Just the group chat," she said without looking at me. "She's planning something fun for next weekend." As the bracelet caught the glow of the TV screen, I couldn't shake the feeling that this gift was more than just a token of friendship. The weeks that followed were a blur of little moments that should have meant nothing, but together, they painted a picture I didn't want to see. Emily started spending more time with Sarah. Their weekly yoga classes turned into full evenings out. "Girls' night," she'd say with a quick kiss on my cheek before rushing out the door. One Friday night, she came downstairs in a dress I hadn't seen in years, a sleek black number that hugged her figure in all the right places. Her hair was styled, her makeup was flawless, and she smelled like the perfume she used to save for special occasions. "Wow," I said, trying to keep my voice light. "Girls' night, huh? You're dressing to impress." She laughed, twirling in front of the mirror. "Sarah wants to hit that new wine bar downtown. You know how she is, everything has to be a scene." As I watched her leave, I felt a pang of something I couldn't quite name. It wasn't jealousy, exactly. It was more like doubt. The bracelet, I noticed, always made an appearance on these nights out. She never wore it around the house or to run errands, but when it came to Sarah, it was front and center. Then there was her phone. Emily had always been open about it, leaving it on the kitchen counter or the coffee table without a second thought. But now, it was always in her hand, locked the second I walked into the room. One night I teased her about it. "Who's got you smiling like that?" "Just the group chat," she said quickly, locking the screen and setting the phone face down. Her tone was casual, but the way she avoided my eyes made my stomach churn. I started noticing other things too. She'd been spending more money than usual. On clothes, on expensive meals, on little things she never used to prioritize. And whenever I asked about it, she brushed me off with a laugh. "Sarah's dragging me along for all her crazy ideas." she'd say. Don't worry, I'll keep us on budget. But it wasn't just the money. It was the way she talked about Sarah, the way her face lit up when she mentioned her. It was subtle, but it was there, and it gnawed at me in a way I couldn't ignore. The night everything unraveled started out like any other. Emily had gone out with Sarah again, leaving me at home with leftovers and a movie. Around 10 p.m., I noticed her phone on the counter. She'd forgotten it. For weeks, I'd been pushing down the nagging voice in my head. I didn't want to be the guy who snoops through his wife's phone. But as I stared at it, that voice grew louder, and the knot in my stomach tightened. I picked it up, my hands trembling as I unlocked it. The first thing I saw was a new message from Sarah. Last night was amazing. I can't stop thinking about you. My heart stopped. I opened their conversation, scrolling through weeks of messages that confirmed what I'd been too afraid to admit. Compliments, plans for secret meetups, inside jokes that went beyond anything I'd ever shared with Emily. Sarah, you look so beautiful in that dress. I couldn't take my eyes off you. Emily, you always know how to make me feel special. I don't deserve you. And then the dagger. Sarah, the bracelet looks perfect on you. I knew it would. Emily, you spoil me too much. But I love it. I dropped the phone onto the counter, my chest heaving. Every doubt, every suspicion, came rushing back with a vengeance. When Emily walked through the door an hour later, I was sitting in the living room, her phone on the coffee table in front of me. We need to talk, I said, my voice cold. She froze, her smile fading. What's going on? I held up the phone, my hand shaking. You tell me. Her face went pale, and for a moment she just stood there, staring at the screen. Then, finally, she whispered, It's not what it looks like. I laughed bitterly. Oh, it's exactly what it looks like. How long, Emily? How long have you been lying to me? Tears filled her eyes, and she sank onto the couch. I didn't mean for it to happen, she said. It just happened. I shook my head, disgusted. You don't just happen to cheat on your husband with your best friend, Emily. You made a choice. Her words, I didn't mean for it to happen, were like nails on a chalkboard. I couldn't comprehend how someone could say that about cheating on their spouse. The betrayal wasn't an accident. It was a series of deliberate choices, and I couldn't let her hide behind the excuse of a mistake. You didn't mean for it to happen? I repeated, my voice trembling with anger. Do you even hear yourself? What does that mean, Emily? That you tripped and fell into Sarah's arms? That this was all some big misunderstanding? Emily's hands clutched the cushion of the couch, her face red and blotchy as tears spilled over her cheeks. I don't know, she cried. It wasn't supposed to go this far. It was just nice to feel wanted again. I froze, her words landing like a sucker punch. Wanted? I said, my voice rising. You've been my wife for 8 years, Emily. I've always wanted you. How could you not know that? She wiped at her face with trembling hands, avoiding my eyes. You've been so distant, Jake. Always working late, always on your phone or playing games when you're home. I felt invisible. The accusation hung in the air between us, and for a split second, I felt a pang of guilt. Had I been distant? Sure, work had been stressful, and I'd leaned on distractions more than I should have. But this wasn't how you solve problems in a marriage. So, instead of telling me how you felt, I said slowly, my anger boiling under the surface, you turned to Sarah. You decided to lie to me, sneak around behind my back, and ruin everything we built together. How does that make any sense? Emily's face crumpled as she sobbed harder, but I wasn't moved. Her tears felt manipulative, a way to deflect from the real issue. She made me feel alive, Emily said through her tears, her voice barely above a whisper. Alive? I repeated, incredulous. What the hell does that even mean? Alive in what way, Emily? Because to me, it sounds like you're saying you enjoyed betraying me. She shook her head furiously, her hands trembling. No, that's not it. I swear, Jake, it wasn't about hurting you. I didn't want to hurt you. I needed something I wasn't getting from us. You didn't want to hurt me? I said, my voice breaking. Then why didn't you come to me? Why didn't you tell me how you felt before jumping into bed with her? I was scared, she admitted, her voice cracking. Scared you wouldn't understand. Scared you'd leave me. I laughed bitterly, pacing the room. So, instead of facing the possibility of losing me, you made it inevitable. Real smart, Emily. She reached out toward me, her eyes pleading. Jake, please. I know I screwed up, but I love you. I've always loved you. We can fix this. I'll cut Sarah out of my life, I swear. Just don't give up on us. I took a step back, shaking my head. You already gave up on us, I said coldly. The moment you decided she was worth more than me. Her sobs grew louder, but I couldn't stand to look at her anymore. I grabbed my car keys from the counter and left, slamming the door behind me. I didn't know where I was going as I pulled out of the driveway. The streets were mostly empty, the occasional set of headlights passing by as I drove aimlessly through the quiet neighborhoods. My hands gripped the steering wheel tightly, my knuckles white as I replayed the conversation in my head. How long had she been lying to me? How many nights had I sat at home, trusting that she was out with her best friend, while they laughed at my expense? The anger came first, hot and overwhelming. I slammed my hand against the steering wheel, cursing under my breath as I thought about every time I'd kissed her goodbye, every time I'd told her I loved her, not knowing the truth. But as the miles stretched on, the anger gave way to something colder, sadness. I pulled into an empty parking lot, turning off the engine as the weight of it all hit me like a tidal wave. Emily had been my world. I'd built my life around her, trusted her completely. And now, that world felt shattered, the foundation cracked beyond repair. I stared out the windshield, my mind racing with questions I didn't want to answer. Was our marriage always doomed? Was I blind to the warning signs, or had she changed somewhere along the way? For the first time, I let myself cry. I sat there in the dark, my head against the steering wheel, as the tears came in waves. The betrayal felt like a physical wound, one that wouldn't stop bleeding no matter how much I tried to ignore it. After what felt like hours, I wiped my face and turned the key in the ignition. I didn't know what my next steps were, but I knew I couldn't go home. Not yet. When I got back to the house, it was nearly 2 a.m. The lights were off, and the silence was deafening as I let myself in. I crashed on the couch without even taking off my shoes, too exhausted to think about anything but sleep. The next morning, I woke to the sound of Emily moving around in the kitchen. For a brief moment, I forgot everything. But then the events of the previous night came flooding back, and the knot in my stomach returned. I stayed on the couch, hoping she'd leave me alone, but Emily appeared in the doorway, clutching a cup of coffee. Her face was pale, her eyes red and puffy. "Jake," she said softly, "can we talk?" "I'm not ready for that," I said flatly, pulling the blanket over myself. Her lip trembled, but she nodded. "Okay. I understand." By the end of the day, I knew I couldn't stay in the house. Being near her was unbearable, every glance a reminder of what she'd done. I packed a bag and called my friend Mike, asking if I could crash at his place. When Emily saw me packing, she panicked. "Jake, please," she said, grabbing my arm. "Don't go. We can fix this." I pulled away, shaking my head. "I need space, Emily. I can't even look at you right now." "I'll do anything," she said, her voice desperate. "Counseling, therapy, whatever it takes. Just don't give up on us." I zipped up my bag and turned to face her. "You gave up on us the second you decided she was more important than me," I said quietly. Her sobs followed me out the door, but I didn't look back. Mike didn't ask questions when I showed up at his doorstep with a duffel bag slung over my shoulder. He just stepped aside, letting me in without a word, and motioned toward the couch. "Take whatever time you need, man," he said, clapping me on the back. "Beer's in the fridge. You know where everything is." I dropped my bag by the couch and sank into the cushions, the weight of the past 24 hours pressing down on me like a lead blanket. Thanks, Mike. I owe you one. Nah, he said, grabbing a beer from the fridge and handing it to me. You'd do the same for me. Whatever this is, you'll get through it. I nodded, though I wasn't sure I believed him. The first night was rough. I barely slept, tossing and turning on the couch as my mind replayed everything: Emily's tear-streaked face, her pathetic excuses, Sarah's name flashing across her phone screen. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw them together, laughing at my expense, their secret world exposed to me only after it was too late. By the time the sun came up, I felt like a zombie. Mike handed me a coffee as I sat at his kitchen table, staring blankly at the wall. You want to talk about it? He asked, sitting across from me. I hesitated. Mike was one of my oldest friends, someone I trusted completely, but saying it out loud felt like ripping open a fresh wound. Emily cheated, I said finally, my voice hollow. With Sarah. Mike's eyebrows shot up. Wait. Sarah? Her best friend Sarah? Yeah, I said, swirling the coffee in my mug. It's been going on for months. I found texts. A lot of texts. Damn, he said, leaning back in his chair. I don't even know what to say, man. That's messed up. You're telling me. I muttered. Mike didn't press me for details, for which I was grateful. He let me sit there in silence, nursing my coffee, as the reality of my situation settled in deeper. Part 8. The texts begin. Emily's text started that afternoon. Jake, please, can we talk? I'm so sorry. I hate how we left things. I need to explain. I love you. I know I hurt you, but please don't give up on us. At first, I didn't reply. What was there to say? She'd already said everything I needed to hear, and none of it made a difference. But as the days went on, her messages became more frantic. You're ignoring me. How is that fair? Don't I deserve a chance to make this right? You're not perfect either, you know. Maybe if you'd paid more attention to me, this wouldn't have happened. So this is it? You're just going to run away and pretend I don't exist? Each text stung more than the last. Her deflection and blame shifting infuriated me, but I still couldn't bring myself to respond. Mike noticed my mood getting worse as the days went by. One night, he came into the living room and tossed the controller onto the couch beside me. Come on, he said. We're playing Mario Kart. You look like you're about to punch a hole in the wall. I managed a weak smile. Thanks, but I'm not in the mood. Doesn't matter, he said, already setting up the game. You need a distraction, and I need someone to beat. Let's go. For the first time in days, I felt a flicker of relief. Part 9. Sarah's audacity. I should have expected Sarah to reach out, but when her number popped up on my phone a week later, it still caught me off guard. I stared at the screen for a moment, debating whether to answer. Against my better judgment, I swiped to accept the call. What do you want, Sarah? I said, my tone sharp. There was a pause on the other end before she spoke. Jake, we need to talk. Please. About what? I snapped. About how you helped destroy my marriage? About how you manipulated Emily? Or maybe about how you thought I'd never find out? Her voice was calm, measured, like she was trying to keep things civil. Jake, I'm not calling to fight. I just think you're misunderstanding what happened. Misunderstanding? I repeated, my anger bubbling over. What exactly am I misunderstanding, Sarah? The texts? The bracelet? The nights you spent together while I was at home trusting both of you? It wasn't like that, she said, her tone softening. Emily was going through a hard time. She felt neglected, and I was just trying to be there for her. By sleeping with her? I shot back. Spare me the noble act, Sarah. You weren't helping her. You were helping yourself. There was a long silence on the other end. Finally, she said, I'm sorry, Jake. I really am. Yeah? I said, my voice dripping with sarcasm. You'll forgive me if I don't find that comforting. Before she could say anything else, I hung up and blocked her number. After 2 weeks at Mike's, I knew I couldn't avoid the inevitable any longer. The couch had become my home base, a place where I alternated between zoning out to the TV and staring at my phone, waiting for the text to stop. But the longer I stayed there, the more I realized I couldn't keep living like this, stuck in limbo, angry and broken. It was time to end it. One morning, over coffee, Mike looked at me from across the kitchen. "You look like you've made a decision," he said, sliding me a fresh mug. "I have," I said quietly. "I'm going to file for divorce." Mike nodded, his expression serious. "You sure about this?" "Yeah," I said, staring into the black surface of my coffee. "There's nothing left to save. Even if she begged, even if she changed, I can't see a future where I trust her again. That's not a marriage, it's a slow death." "Then you're doing the right thing," Mike said. "It's gonna suck, but you'll come out stronger." That afternoon, I sat in the office of Karen Miller, a divorce lawyer I'd found through a friend's recommendation. Karen was a no-nonsense woman in her mid-40s, the kind of person who radiated competence and control. She listened intently as I explained everything: the texts, the bracelet, the nights Emily spent with Sarah, and the way my marriage had unraveled. When I finished, Karen leaned back in her chair, her pen tapping against her notepad. "You've got a strong case," she said finally. "Infidelity is one of the clearest grounds for divorce, especially with the evidence you have. The question is, how do you want to approach this?" I frowned. "What do you mean?" "Well," she said, folding her hands on the desk, "there are two paths we can take. If Emily is willing to cooperate, we can file for an uncontested divorce and settle things amicably. That's faster and less expensive. But if she fights it, or tries to make things difficult, we may have to negotiate, or even go to court. What do you think she'll do?" I asked. Karen shrugged. "It depends on her state of mind. Some people fight because they can't let go, or because they want to drag things out as punishment. Others are pragmatic and just want to move on." I thought about the texts Emily had sent me, the mix of apologies, blame, and desperate pleas. "She's not going to make this easy," I said. Karen nodded. "Then we'll be prepared for that." She spent the next hour walking me through the process, drafting the petition, dividing assets, and preparing for Emily's likely response. By the time I left her office, I felt a strange mix of relief and dread. This was the end of my marriage. But at least it was a step forward. A week after my meeting with Karen, Emily was served with the divorce papers. I wasn't there when it happened, but I imagined the scene clearly: her shock, the way her face would fall as she realized it wasn't just a threat. This was real. The fallout was immediate. My phone lit up with calls and texts as soon as she received them. "Jake, please. You don't have to do this. Let's talk. This isn't fair. I can't believe you'd go this far without giving me a chance to fix things. Are you really throwing away everything we've built? Don't let Sarah's mistake destroy us." Sarah's mistake. The audacity of that phrasing made my blood boil. She still couldn't admit the truth, couldn't own up to her betrayal without deflecting or shifting blame. I didn't respond. The text kept coming, though, growing more frantic with each passing day. She cycled through every tactic: apologies, anger, guilt. One morning, as I sat on Mike's couch sipping coffee, another string of messages buzzed through. "I still love you. I know I hurt you, but we can get past this. I'll cut Sarah out of my life completely. I'll never speak to her again. Please, Jake, don't give up on us. Running away isn't the answer. If you'd been more present, none of this would have happened. Don't act like you're innocent in all this." Mike glanced over from the kitchen, where he was frying eggs. "She's still at it?" "Yup," I said, tossing my phone onto the coffee table. "Same nonsense as always. I love you. It's your fault. Rinse and repeat." Mike shook his head, flipping the eggs with a spatula. "You'd think she'd at least try something new. Let me guess, she's promising to cut Sarah off this time?" "Bingo," I said bitterly. Mike brought over 2 plates, sitting down across from me. "You gonna respond?" "No," I said firmly. There's nothing to say. I've made my decision, and nothing she says is going to change that. Good, Mike said, taking a bite of his toast. Stick to your guns. She'll try to wear you down, but you've got to remember why you're doing this. It's about you now, not her. A few days later, Emily showed up at Mike's place. I was on my way back from a run when I spotted her car parked out front. My heart sank as I jogged up the driveway and saw her standing on the porch, clutching her phone like it was a lifeline. "Jake," she said, her voice cracking as I approached. "What are you doing here?" I asked, wiping the sweat from my forehead. "We need to talk," she said, her eyes red and puffy. "You won't answer my calls, and I can't just sit at home waiting for you to." "You got the papers," I interrupted, my tone flat. That was the conversation. She flinched, but she didn't back down. "Please, Jake. Just hear me out. I know I hurt you, but I don't want to lose you. I'll do anything, counseling, therapy, whatever it takes. Just give me one more chance." I sighed, crossing my arms as I leaned against the porch railing. "Emily, you've had weeks to take responsibility for what you did, and all you've done is make excuses. You can't blame Sarah. You can't blame me. This is on you." "I know," she said quickly, her voice trembling. "I know I messed up. I let things get out of control, and I didn't think about how much it would hurt you. But Jake, I love you. I've always loved you. Then why wasn't that enough?" I asked, my voice breaking despite my best efforts to stay calm. "Why wasn't I enough?" Her face crumpled, and she stepped closer, reaching out for me. "You are enough, Jake. You've always been enough. I was just... I don't know. I was scared. Lonely. Sarah made me feel like I mattered again, but it wasn't real. None of it was real." I stepped back, out of her reach. "But it was real to me. The lies, the nights you spent with her, the messages. That was my reality. And I can't forgive that, Emily. I can't move past it." Her sobs grew louder, and for a moment, I thought she might collapse. "Please," she whispered, her voice breaking. "Please, Jake. Don't do this." I shook my head, swallowing the lump in my throat. "It's already done." I walked inside without another word, closing the door behind me as Emily's cries echoed through the empty hallway. After Emily's visit, things finally settled into an eerie quiet. The texts stopped, the calls stopped, and for the first time in weeks, I wasn't waking up to a barrage of notifications. It should have felt like relief, but instead, it felt like a vacuum, empty and disorienting. Mike, ever the supportive friend, noticed my restlessness. One evening, as I mindlessly scrolled through apartment listings, he leaned against the counter and tossed me a beer. "You've been staring at that screen for hours," he said. "Find anything good?" "Maybe," I said, shrugging. "It's hard to tell. Everything looks the same after a while." Mike nodded, taking a sip of his drink. "You're overthinking it. Just pick a place and move on. You don't need a mansion, you need a fresh start." He was right. I didn't need the perfect apartment. I just needed a space that was mine. The next day, I signed a lease on a small one-bedroom in a quiet part of town. It wasn't much, just a cozy living room, a dated kitchen, and a bedroom with a creaky closet door, but it felt like a step forward. The first night in my new apartment was strange. I sat on the floor, eating takeout pizza and drinking a beer, surrounded by half-unpacked boxes. The silence was overwhelming, but it was also comforting in a way I hadn't expected. I opened a box labeled Photos, and started flipping through old albums. Pictures of me and Emily stared back at me, smiling at a beach, laughing at a friend's wedding, cuddling on the couch during a snowy weekend. For the first time, the memories didn't hit me like a punch to the gut. Instead, they felt distant, like relics from a past life. "You're not that person anymore," I whispered to myself. I set the photos aside and grabbed my laptop, making a list of goals for the months ahead. Get back into running, learn to cook something other than spaghetti, reconnect with old friends. It wasn't much, but it was a start. Over the next few weeks, I threw myself into rebuilding. I joined a gym, picked up a new project at work, and started saying yes to every invitation from friends. One night, Chris invited me out for drinks, and I found myself laughing more than I had in months. "So, what's next?" Chris asked, raising an eyebrow. "You dipping your toe back in the dating pool, or are you swearing off women forever?" I laughed, shaking my head. "Definitely not dating. I need to figure out who I am before I bring someone else into this mess." "Smart move," Chris said, clinking his glass against mine. It wasn't much, but for the first time in a long time, I felt like I was moving forward. "Let me know if this works. I'll adjust all remaining parts to align with the medium-length structure and ensure the story stays within your desired character range." By the time the divorce was finalized, it felt like I'd aged a decade. The weeks leading up to it were a blur of paperwork, meetings with Karen, and the occasional emotional gut punch when I'd remember how far things had spiraled. The day I signed the final papers was anticlimactic. Karen handed me a pen, and with a few strokes, I ended 8 years of marriage. I expected some grand wave of relief or sadness to hit me, but instead I felt numb. "You did the right thing," Karen said, sliding the papers into her folder. "This is the hard part, but you'll thank yourself later." I nodded, not trusting myself to speak. That evening, I sat in my apartment with a whiskey in hand, staring out the window at the city lights. The noise of the world outside felt like a distant hum, a reminder that life was moving on even if I didn't feel ready to join it yet. I thought about Emily, about everything we'd shared, the good and the bad. There was a part of me that still missed her, a part that wanted to believe in the person she used to be. But I knew better. The woman I'd married was gone, replaced by someone I barely recognized. I pulled out the box of photos I'd unpacked weeks earlier and started flipping through them again. One picture caught my eye, a candid shot of us from a trip to the mountains. We were sitting by a campfire, her head on my shoulder, laughing at something I couldn't remember. I stared at the photo for a long time before setting it aside. "It's over," I whispered to myself. And for the first time, I felt like I truly believed it. In the months that followed, I started to find pieces of myself I hadn't realized were missing. The gym became my sanctuary, a place where I could focus on the physical instead of the emotional. Running helped clear my head, each mile feeling like a small victory over the chaos I'd left behind. Work, too, became a welcome distraction. I took on new projects, volunteered for extra shifts, and slowly began to feel like I was building something meaningful again. But the real breakthrough came when I reconnected with friends I hadn't seen in years. Old college buddies, coworkers I'd lost touch with, people who reminded me of the person I used to be before everything had revolved around Emily. One night, Chris invited me to a small get-together at his place. It was just a handful of people, casual and low-key. "You seem lighter," he said, handing me a beer. "Lighter?" I asked with a raised eyebrow. "Yeah," he said, leaning against the counter. "Like you've finally dropped the weight of everything that happened. It looks good on you." I smiled, realizing he was right. For the first time in a long time, I wasn't carrying the burden of Emily's betrayal.